Welcome back to 7th Circle Gaming. Today we're going to analyze Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, the Borderlands game hosted by the explosives demolitions expert from Borderlands 2 and some would say fan favorite character, Tiny Tina. Well, let's get started here with the full disclosure. And like we always say, you're very welcome to pause the video at this point and read all of these disclosures, or if you'd prefer not to, we'll jump right into the screenshots. Now, the first one that we're going to share with you is the major change that Wonderlands brings to the Borderlands formula, which is the addition of this Overworld, which players familiar with the Japanese RPGs, JRPGs, will be quite familiar with. It works in very much the same way, where the player character and party wanders around the overworld, and when they encounter a combat encounter, they're taken to an arena where that combat takes place. And at the completion of the combat, they return to the overworld. The second screenshot that we'd like to share with you is what the world itself looks like. And anyone who's played a Borderlands series game should be familiar with this. Most of the items are in the same places that they usually are. They've renamed a couple of things. Instead of grenades, players are going to be using spells, and instead of shields, they collect wards. And with that, we're going to move on to our third screenshot, which is one of the hallmarks of the Borderlands series, that being the absurd, randomly generated collection of weapons. And all of the attached statistics go with them. And on that note, it seems as good as any to start moving into compiling scores and assigning values to things. So let's move right along. And for its immersion score, Wonderlands has earned a 7.5 out of 15. As we saw earlier, it uses a first-person perspective, and the world is presented in a cel-shaded fantasy style. That basically meaning that the characters are fantasy-inspired. Instead of shooting Jason Voorhees in a scrapyard, it's shooting zombies in a cornfield. Sort of, as an analogy. The game also attempts to use player agency to get players invested in the game, because there are several character archetypes that are loosely based on Dungeons and Dragons characters with a bit of a Borderlands flavor added to them. As anyone who's played a Borderlands series game before was also going to be painfully aware, statistics focus is a major aspect of the game. All the weapons and shields and grenades or spells have statistics attached that players are going to want to compare with what they are currently equipping and to see if whether that's an improvement or not. The game does attempt to tell a story in the sense that at various points the characters who are supposedly playing the game on the higher level will comment on what's going on. But it's not, we would necessarily say it's an overwhelming presence. One of the major things, though, that that Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is going to be using is the usual combat. We're looking at a fairly fast-paced, ranged and melee combat, fairly typical. The game is also going to be using audio cues to get players invested into the game world. Some of these are going to be the typical combat sounds, others are going to be the sort of audio lines that the players of the Borderlands series are going to be fairly familiar with. Referential humor, attempts at jokey dialogue, that sort of thing. And Well, since that's all there is to say about immersion, let's move on to difficulty. This is just a screenshot to illustrate what options the game has for difficulty at the start. It's certainly possible that there might be more options that open up later or added as DLC. But as it stands now, a player who purchases the game will get these options. Do note that the description of how that really affects gameplay is pretty limited, but it does say that the balanced is the intended difficulty level. With that, Borderlands, or it's so easy to confuse the two. Wonderlands has earned a 4 out of 15 for difficulty. It certainly is playable with a gamepad or keyboard and mouse, whichever the player prefers. It does provide multiple options for difficulty, as we saw in that screenshot just a minute ago. The user interface is fairly minimalist in general, although of course when viewing the inventory or various other things it does take over the screen. On the other hand, the control inputs are not overly complicated, so there's not going to be any remembering Alt, Shift, Control forward or anything bizarre like that. So that's another positive in the game's favor. One other thing to note that it does seem from all of our evaluation sessions that the enemies do seem to level with the player character, so there's very little chance of being overpowered and being able to just breeze through any of the combat encounters. So on that note, let's move on to Lasting Appeal. Now, for Lasting Appeal, Wonderlands has earned a 7 out of 15. It doesn't have mod support in. That is to say, mod support through the Steam Workshop or the Epic Game Store or any of the others storefronts that are available. It doesn't mean that that won't be added at present or that there aren't mods available through third-party or fourth-party websites. It does have a fair amount of downloadable content available, which does add to the story, and there is the possibility of playing through the game with multiple different characters. That's been something of a hallmark of the Borderlands series for a while, that one player character might get a very special weapon or a special unlock that's not usable by that character archetype, but is used by another one. So yes, there is a way of sharing items across characters. One other thing to note is the game does seem to be playable for any amount of time. The combat encounters that we've been referencing take maybe 3 to 5 minutes to complete, depending on what difficulty level the player has chosen. But on normal, about 5 minutes is a good estimate. The story, as we noted earlier, isn't an overwhelming presence, so it's not really going to be limiting the replay value of the game. So it's earned a 7 out of 15 for the Lasting Appeal. One of the major drivers of that is going to be the multiple character combinations and the DLC that's available for it. And with that, let's move on to the overall. Overall, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is earned a 6.16 out of 15. Some players might want to move that up to a 7 out of 15, but the gist of it all, or in summation, Wonderlands is basically more Borderlands gameplay with updated referential humor. And that's all there is to say about Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. Congratulations, this is the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Leave any comments you have about our analysis in the comments section below. If you liked this kind of more analytical review, Subscribe for more from 7th Circle Gaming, and goodbye.